Hi, I'm Errol Laborde. Marcia is off tonight. Even the president got involved this week with the violent crime spike that is affecting cities across the country. Could there be a realistic hope for New Orleans? We'll examine. We'll also look at a crackdown on a different type of crime, fraudulent highway accident claims. On the Northshore, Slidell faces a political battle for a proposed casino resort, and St. Tammany Parish faces flooding issues. In other news, we'll hear from a columnist who's been cautious about COVID, but who now has second thoughts about other precautions. And we'll share comments on today's scheduled sentencing in the George Floyd case. Joining us are tonight's informed sources. Will Sutton, columnist, the Times-Picayune, New Orleans Advocate. Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. And Sara Pagones, staff writer, the Picayune Advocate. Mike, we'll start with you. The president, we know any president faces a lot of battles, but he's facing a big war at home, and that is crime, which is spiking across the country. And it's very unusual to have a president direct head-on comments about domestic crime. What do we learn, and what can they do?
Well, the reason why presidents don't often get involved, it's a very local issue. In this case, with a spike seen in major cities across the country, President Biden, did step in. But interesting to note that he did not propose any new legislation. He really proposed things that would enhance existing laws and enforcement and redirect some money. For example, I guess one of the biggest points of his plan is to double down on enforcement of regulations against, gun dealers, straw purchases, not running proper background checks, and he can control that enforcement through Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Bureau, ATF, along with the U.S. attorneys across the country. So that's something that could have an immediate impact. There are some other elements that involve redirecting existing resources. For example, the COVID relief money in the American Rescue Act. He is going to have some guidelines that will make it easy for states and municipalities to use that COVID relief money for police departments. It's very interesting that, amid this defund the police movement that gave rise out of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter protests. Of course, Joe Biden never signed on to defund the police. In fact, he said he's against that. What this plan does is kind of the opposite. It does redirect COVID relief money for whatever individual police departments feel is necessary to retrain, to hire new officers, which is another critical issue. In light of everything that's happened around the country, police departments are shrinking. People are, leaving law enforcement to, for other jobs, and recruiting pipeline is drying up. So that looks like a long-term problem. What is interesting for Louisiana is that Baton Rouge was listed as one of the cities that is going to qualify for some of these redirected funds right off the bat. New Orleans, which arguably has a much more serious problem with spikes in violent crime that matches some of the highest rates of any of the urban areas in the country, is not on that list, despite clearly a dire need. New Orleans is doing its own things, such as bringing in some state police troopers under Operation Golden Eagle to help with some patrols. But it will be interesting to see. The door is not closed on New Orleans getting in on some of the federal programs. Some of those programs mentioned by the president are in place in various forms in New Orleans. For example, and this is more sort of a bully pulpit rather than actual legislation, the president mentioned making it easier for ex-convicts to get into the job market. Ban the box, that box that is often on employment applications to state whether you've been convicted of a crime. Ban the box tries to eliminate that so as not to stigmatize people who have paid their debt to society during prison time, and actual programs, reentry programs to get ex-offenders into the job market. once again, as a way to reduce recidivism and overall reduce crime. It is very interesting that in New Orleans, like many places in the rest of the country, we have the spike in violent crime at the same time as criminal justice reform efforts, and many of the policies seem to, be contradictory, such as, reducing or eliminating bail after, arrests. Of course, a slogan by the anti-bail reformers is that, bail does not make us safer, but then we just look no further than the Portia Pollock tragic fatal stabbing by a man named Brian Andre, who had pending armed robbery charges, was out on bail, and was supposed to be on an electric ankle monitor that apparently did not happen because it wasn't included in the judge's order. So clearly there are some deep underlying issues that needed to be sorted out. Generally speaking, when there's fear among ordinary residents about crime, that takes precedent. You actually look to leadership from, the mayor, who hires and controls, to some extent, the police department, on board to some extent on the progressive side of criminal justice reform. But once again, she commands, a police department that is now under the gun, obviously undermanned, and somewhat at a loss as to a very specific crime-fighting strategy to knock down, for example, the biggest spike in New Orleans is those carjackings up 110% over last year.
Okay. Okay, we have to move on, but it's I'm almost shocked in retrospect looking at the fact that there's people are debating whether it's an issue, whether or not you should fund the police or about the, how tough should we be on crime, but that itself has become part of an issue. Another issue that we've had a tough time with has been COVID, as is the rest of the world. Will, you do a column in the Picayune, and as I've known you during this past year, you're the guy who's done it right. You're the guy who's really taken serious all the precautions, as far as I know. And yet, you did a column last Sunday where you said, look, let's look at science. And part of you looking at science, you said, we really don't need the mask anymore. Just give your thoughts about the status of precautions right now.
So that's correct, but let me clarify. The pandemic is not over. It's still ongoing. I was really strict. My boss even said I've been monk-like with following the guidelines and always staying behind on City of New Orleans phases and State of Louisiana phases. So
and let me point out, you've been on the show several times. This is the first time you're in studio.
Absolutely.
All the other times you've Zoomed.
Because I wasn't going to come around you guys or anybody else.
Okay.
But what happened is the CDC and NIH folks said that it's okay to drop the mask in certain situations if you're fully vaccinated. I am fully vaccinated. But I could not let go of the mask. And so I kept wearing the mask and kept wearing it in all types of situations, including walking on the sidewalk in the neighborhood by myself, because I didn't want to have any possibilities. But then as I follow this near daily and look at all kinds of different government reports, I realized that I not only have been living this way, but I've been telling other people to, let's look at the science. The science had changed recently, and I did not. And that's just not consistent to me. So I am not wearing a mask as often. I carry a mask with me. I carry a mask in the car. So when I approach places that require a mask, suggest a mask, or if it's a large enough crowd where I'm going to be fairly close to people, I'm going to put the mask on. But I have to say I'm enjoying the new maskless freedom, and happy to be with you all here today.
Well, I think one thing everybody agrees on is getting vaccinated, but why are there still so many people not getting vaccinated?
Well, you know, one of the interesting things I find interesting and troubling is that healthcare facilities, particularly hospitals, have a large percentage of people who are not vaccinated. My dad's 90 years old. I don't wish that he'll be in a hospital for anything anytime soon. But if he does go into the hospital, I really don't want people who are unvaccinated handling my 90-year-old dad, whether it is cleaning the floor, changing the linens, or administering his medicine, taking his blood pressure, or, you know, Lord knows, you know, going into surgery. I don't think it's a good idea for us just to say it's okay to be divided into unvaccinated people and vaccinated people. Entirely different thing if I'm going into the hardware store to buy a hammer, a screwdriver, or a nail, going to be in there for a few minutes. If there's an unvaccinated person, I wish him or her luck. I hope it doesn't go down in a bad way for them. But again, the science and the data is showing us that you know, the vaccines are working. We had an Associated Press report just in the last day or so that shows that fewer than 1,200 of the 853,000 people hospitalized with COVID in May were vaccinated people. That's 0.1%. And then when you look at the number of deaths, we've got like 150 of 180,000 deaths are vaccinated people. Clearly, the vaccines are working. We want to keep people healthy. And if you do catch COVID with vaccination, it's not going to be as bad as it would have been without the vaccination. And we have a lot of people still believing in myths and a lot of things that are simply not true. These things have been debunked. And so it's up to us. It's up to us to convince them.
Well, as we go into this, I advise everybody to follow Will's lead. So if you have any, questions, call him up and say, "Well, what should we do?"
I have one quick question for you, Will.
I think he's doing it the right way.
Just real quick, Will, on that, what do you think about, with all these events coming up like Jazz Fest, Saint Season will start, a bunch of people packed together, what do you think about the very controversial issue of whether people would be required to show proof of a vaccine to go to these major events? What do you think about that?
Well, I have to say, I was a little stunned when I heard about the Madison Square Garden event, but then I was pretty pleased when I heard that they were required to have proof of vaccination, and it was a big crowd, a very successful event. I think we're going to be looking at more of those opportunities, and people will have to make up their mind that they are going to go vaccinated, they're not going to go because they're unvaccinated, or that they're going to go to an event that has no such requirement. And who knows, that might be what we're looking at with Jazz Fest.
Okay, we have to move on. Something else, but thank you. Sara Pagones covers the Northshore for The Advocate. Sara, something else people have to make up their minds on.
That's right.
Is casino for Slidell. What's the status of that? Will there be a vote? And what does it look like? Which way is it going to go?
Well, first thing that has to happen is Parish Council has to vote to put it on the ballot, the November 13th ballot. And they'll be having a special meeting Wednesday that is expected to draw a lot of people, probably passionate on both sides, to say yes or no, put it on the ballot. All signs are that it is going to be put on the ballot. Parish officials and leaders have been kind of pushing the idea of the economic development, but also, you know, kind of couching it in, well, we want to give people the opportunity to vote. We're for people having a vote. And that's kind of been a political cover for them, I think, on not addressing whether it's a good or bad thing necessarily, but just everybody should get a chance to vote. So that'll come down in November. It'll be a referendum. The last time St. Tammany Parish voters voted on this, it was in 1995. It was defeated by about 62% of the voters. people that are sort of for the casino point to last fall's vote on sports betting, when it passed by 67% of the vote in St. Tammany Parish and won in every single precinct, as evidence that maybe, a generational change and just a change in attitudes toward gaming in the last quarter century.
Has it sweetened the deal any that they have a proposed resort as part of the development?
Yeah, it's not going to be, the typical riverboat. In fact, it's going to be built off the water, which is something that the legislature just recently, I guess within the last couple of years, allowed casinos to do. And so it's going to have a 250-room hotel. It's going to have restaurants. It's going to have a 5,000 seating amphitheater. It's going to have a convention meeting space. It's now a $325 million facility. They originally put it forward as $250 million, but just this week they said it's going to actually be more like $325 million. They're going to hire 700 people when they open, 1,000 people by the third year if they're successful. They've made a commitment to try to give half those jobs to St. Tammany Parish residents. So it's being viewed by leaders as a big economic development boon.
Okay, if it happens, we'll hope that by then there'll be less flooding in the area, and we'll come back and talk about that in a moment. Meanwhile, let's get back to Mike. Michael, last week there was many arrests in a case I know you started reporting on about fraud, vehicle fraud on highways, people bumping into trucks, causing an accident, and then working with attorneys. Give us your summary of where that issue stands now.
Well, I can tell you that as an issue, people are against it. It's a crime. These are called staged accidents. They're intentionally created. People pack into a car. There's a driver called a slammer who usually sideswipes an 18-wheeler, which, in Louisiana required to carry $1 million worth of insurance. And then all of the occupants get funneled to particular attorneys who file lawsuits on their behalf. Now, what we have seen, and I've been talking about this case and following this case and doing special reports for the better part of a year, is there's a massive federal investigation. We now have 33 indictments, and 25 of those people indicted have pleaded guilty. What is interesting is that as each of these guilty pleas gets recorded and the confessions or factual bases get filed in court, the bulk of, let's say 32 exactly, of the 33 are just the people who packed cars and helped stage the accidents. Only one of the defendants is an attorney, an accident attorney, who aided in funneling these cases into court and filing lawsuits and settling for millions of dollars. Daniel Patrick Keating finally pleaded guilty, and that factual basis is a fascinating document because it implicates, as we have stated all along, and I've focused on many of my stories on this, other law firms and other attorneys are implicated as being in on the scam. What we haven't seen are grand jury indictments of those attorneys or law firms. And the big $64,000 question is, where does this massive federal case go now? It's been developed over several years. They have hinted in the past about not just big law firms, but clinics, doctors' offices, all of the medical people who perform surgeries when not necessary. Now, we know that some of the low-level defendants who fraudulently collected settlements actually went so far as to have surgeries that were unnecessary. And the feds have always made a target of, rounding up everybody who is involved, but right now they're stuck on the lower rungs of the ladder, and it is yet to be seen. Now, I mentioned Daniel Patrick Keating because he would emerge as a critical government witness. Along with the guilty plea comes with cooperation with the feds. And the question is, how much direct knowledge and information does he have against other attorneys? He oftentimes was an attorney representing one plaintiff and referred several other plaintiffs who might have packed the same car to other attorneys. How closely did he work with them? What's contained in various documents, emails, phone calls, yet to be seen. The grand jury has been toiling at this for some time, and it is getting to be, with, once again, this guilty plea by the one attorney implicated, charged, and now convicted, where it's going to go from here.
Okay. Well, we have to go to the next segment from here. But I got to say, if someone wants to be a criminal, they got to really be desperate if they choose a profession which involves crashing into trucks and then getting unnecessary surgery.
Tough way to make a buck.
Yeah, it seems like there are better career paths than that. Sarah, let's go back to you. There's been lots of rain lately. It's probably rain right now in St. Tammany. There's been lots of flooding issues, and of course, St. Tammany has a lot of water. There's a lot of tributaries through there. There's the lake. Can anything be done?
Well, you know, the Corps of Engineers just came out with a report saying that there's a $4 billion fix, but that is a long way off from even being finished as a report, much less any kind of funding for it. You know, 10 inches of rain on last Friday, and about maybe 275, 300 homes took on 4 to 6 inches of water. People are comparing it to the 1995 May flood. But we've had flooding, you know, of course, catastrophic in Katrina, and then also in 2016, both in March and in August. It's a gravity drainage system for the most part over there. When there's a lot of water in a short amount of time, it's very hard for it to overcome. And one of the things the Corps is saying is elevate about 6,000 homes, which is actually the most expensive part of their proposal.
Are there places where people actually shouldn't be building homes? Or
well, that's a good question because, you know, there's always been a lot of development over there, and there's still growth over there, and there's been a growing movement of people saying, look, we have got to stop building slab-on-grade construction in floodplains. So far, that's not gotten too far, but there is a lot more pushback on the fact that some of these areas are maybe intended to hold water and to help with that rather than to run off into you know, other people's homes because of concrete slabs.
Which is the most flood-prone area right now?
Oh, that would be hard to say. You know, it kind of depends on if you're talking about rain, if you're talking about river flooding. You know, South Slidell didn't do too badly. Military Road area, which is usually gets Pearl River flooding, actually got flooding from rain this time. So I think it'd be hard to say, but I just think anybody that lives in an area where they have to buy flood insurance is probably in a flood-prone area. And if you're around, you know, where the rivers are likely to spill their banks, that's got to be flood-prone too, and that's on both sides of the parish. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. Let's move on to Will. Will, today was the day that Derek Chauvin was to be sentenced in the George Floyd case. We just got word he was sentenced to 22 and a half years. I'd just like to get your comments.
Yeah, I have to say I was wrong on this. I thought he might get as much as 20 years. So I'm a little surprised that he got 22 and a half years. I think it's reflective of the aggravated factors that the prosecution was making a case for, because the judge did have some sentencing flexibility. But the core of this murder is that it was so intentional. It was not one of these law enforcement cases where it was a split-second, 1, 2, or 3 second type of decision, and everybody saw it. So it's not as though we have those types of aggravated circumstances all the time. I do hope that with this sentencing, the judge is sending a message to law enforcement nationally, and that we'll see fewer of these specific types of cases. We've seen too much. There's more and more video. We have our own cases in Louisiana with state police in particular, and we don't want to forget those. And we needed to see the video to get more of the real story. And we certainly will be watching the ebb and the flow with the police hiring, promotion, these aggravated, questionable circumstances with police handling of citizens. No one I know is saying if you do the crime, you shouldn't do the time. It's a matter of how police are handling individuals who may or may not have done something wrong.
Mike, I know you spend a lot of time talking with the police. What kind of impact is this having on the police? And are there new reforms that you see being implemented?
Well, the reforms come by way of training of police officers. You're hearing something that is now a standard course in police training departments called de-escalation, and the officers' actions and everything from the pulling over a car to the initial commands to somebody pulled over are critically important, and it kind of sets the stage for something to go peacefully or to turn more hostile. We do know that this has actually been studied and is being funded in police departments. I know the New Orleans Police Department, under a federal consent decree, for example, it has been mandated that it started with body cameras. That's now sweeping the country. Most police departments have it. New Orleans was one of the first to make it sort of a mandatory part of a federal consent decree, and now it's extending to the training of individual officers.
Okay, we need to move on. Well, thank you very much. Let's go and look ahead at the other news stories that we should be looking at. Will, let's go ahead with you.
Well, of course, we had the United States Supreme Court rule against the NCAA, and now college athletes will be able to earn some type of pay other than the school tuition and those sorts of things. And what we're going to see is legislators get into recruiting, because the states are going to help their institutions recruit, and they're going to have to do it by helping the athletes see, we have a good team, a better team with you, and we have this special deal that you can only do in our state. So there's going to be a whole combination of efforts going after this in a different way.
Sara?
Well, in St. Tammany Parish, there's also going to be a tax vote in October that has been thrice turned down by voters. It's for the jail and for the courthouse, for the 22nd Judicial District Court. They're trying again. They're saying, oh, this isn't a fourth attempt, this is a first attempt, but it's really basically the same thing for the same cause. So we'll see what happens if voters are in a less grumpy mood about taxes.
Okay, Mike?
On the topic of criminal justice in New Orleans, that ankle monitoring program that I mentioned that failed so horribly in the death of Portia Pollock by someone who was supposed to be on an ankle monitor, I've done a deep dive into other cases under the electronic monitoring and found some holes, some other things slipped through the cracks. I'm hoping to come out with that story early next week, possibly Tuesday night. So be on the lookout for that on WWL TV.
Sara, in a couple of years from now, if we go to Slidell, will we see a casino?
I'm going to bet that you will.
What are the odds? What are the odds?
Well, a lot of the arguments that we hear
think you will.
that we hear against casino remind me of the same arguments you heard 30 years ago about casinos, and so they're being revived. Some of those things I don't think happened, but anyway, but the issue still goes on.
Right.
Thank you all very much. Thank you all for watching. Everybody at home, if you don't know where your umbrella is, go and look for it. There's more rain this weekend. See you next Friday. Bye-bye.